Welcome to the Way to the Truth cast. I'm Tony, and I thought I would invite you to my game room to watch Tucker Carlson's latest interview with Bobby Kennedy Jr. In watching the teaser for this, I became a little concerned. I know that Trump agreed with him that he would not discuss the differences that they have. But he talks obviously in this interview about environmentalism, and I forgot that about Robert Kennedy personally, or Bobby Kennedy, and so Junior, and that's one of the things that we'll probably see in this. And so sit back, get you something to drink and eat, and because we'll be here for a while. Tucker likes to have 2 hour interviews. I have learned, or at least tried to shut them down after 2 hours. So we'll be here for a while. So here is Tucker Carlson interviewing Bobby Kennedy.
We're honored to announce that J.D. Vance, the vice presidential nominee, is confirmed for a live tour stop in Hershey, Pennsylvania next month. Tickets are on sale at tuckercarlson.com. We hope to see you there. We'll be in cities all across the country starting next week. But first, our interview with Bobby Kennedy Jr., his first since endorsing Donald Trump on Friday. Here it is. So people were shocked. I know a lot of people you know well were shocked when you endorsed Trump. I was not shocked because for all the areas where you disagree on specific issues, there's a consistent theme that I've noticed in both of your lives, which is you both spent the majority of your life, in your case, your whole life, in the American ruling class, and both of you decided that it's corrupt and that you were going to say so out loud at great risk to both of you, and so it was probably just a matter of time before you aligned in some way. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a bunch of realignments, political realignments, about 4 or 5 throughout American history, and I think we're going through one right now with the Democratic Party, and with both political parties, really changing in this very dramatic way. And you and I talked earlier about the transformation of the Republican Party into the party of environmentalism.
Yes.
And, the Democratic Party has one environmental issue, which is this carbon orthodoxy, which ends up benefiting, the oil companies and BlackRock and Goldman Sachs with offshore wind and carbon capture, $100 billion carbon capture projects, which is part of just the strip mining of the middle class. And it's the only issue you can talk about in the Democratic Party. I got into the environmental movement to do habitat protection, to do wildlife conservation,
Exactly.
to get toxics out of our kids.
Amen.
And none of these are issues that the party itself, Democrats care about them, but the party itself doesn't. But there's been these big, profound realignments, and it's not only on that issue, it's really the domination of this corrupt merger of state and corporate power that is happening in Washington, D.C. now, where our democracy has really been subverted by the industries that have taken over the regulatory agencies, and they become transformed them into sock puppets or corporate profit taking. And basically wholly owned subsidiaries of the industries they're supposed to regulate. And the Democrats, for a variety of reasons, and I watched it happen over many, many years, have clung to this illusion of these democratic institutions that they're still democratic, and they have a belief we all have the capacity to judge ourselves on our intentions rather than our actions, right?
I've been there.
So. And the Democratic Party judged itself, it sees itself, my friends who are Democrats, see themselves as part of the good guys, the white hats, and that, they're like the good guys who are in Fort Apache, surrounded by the forces of barbarism that are about to storm the gate, and they're the only ones. The only way to keep it at bay is to elect a president who has dementia, and because you're voting for the apparatus.
Yes.
And you're not voting for, or another president, then to handpick a presidential candidate without any elections, to basically get rid of democracy in order to save it, and handpick a candidate who in 40 days now has not given a single interview on any media outlet. And I think about when my uncle and father would think about that. They prided themselves on being able to go on debate. It was the centerpiece. The whole function of democracy was to anneal ideas in the furnace of debate and have them rise up in the marketplace of ideas. And the idea that and we have this British tradition of Churchill and the others in the House of Commons, and being able to defend their policies and being forced to defend their policies articulately, eloquently. And, my uncle and father just thought ideas are important and we should be able to defend them. And if you can't defend them, there's something wrong with you.
Yes.
And why? So we have a presidential candidate that was selected by the Democratic Party who can't do that. And one of the things that my uncle and father will always think about is, how do we look to the rest of the world, right? They were conscious that America was the template for democracy. When we created our modern democracy in 1789 or 1791, when the Bill of Rights was ratified, we were the only democracy on earth. By 1865, during the end of the Civil War, there were 5, and they were all modeled on America. And by the time my uncle took office, there was about 150, and by the end of the 60s, there's 190. They're all based on American model. And, we very much were the exemplary nation. We were the example of democracy around the globe, and they were very conscious. They were embarrassed at first by the civil rights movement, because they said, what is the rest of the world going to think about it? And then they realized, well, we better correct, the problem.
Yeah.
Because everything that they did, they were conscious that they were being watched. Well, what does the rest of the world think of American democracy right now? That, that we have in one party selected a man with dementia to lead the free world, and then turned around and picked a person, a woman who cannot give an interview. She cannot defend her vision or America's record in the world. And then she gave this, Vice President Harris gave this speech at the convention that was written by neocons. And they had CIA directors talking at the Democratic Convention, military people talking at the Democratic Convention. My father and my uncle were the party of anti-war. My uncle was asked by his best friend, Ben Bradley, one of his 2 best friends who ran the Washington Post, what do you want on your gravestone, your epitaph? And my uncle said immediately, he kept the peace. He said the primary job of a president of the United States was to keep the country out of war. He said he didn't want children in Africa and Latin America and Asia, and they heard about the United States of America, to think of a man with a gun. They wanted them to think of a Peace Corps volunteer and the Alliance for Progress and USAID, which were programs that he created to build the middle class, to end run the oligarchs, end run the military hunters that used to receive the USA, and instead go directly to the poor and build institutions, education and health and all the institutions of democracy, to continue to model it for the rest of the world and live up to what we're supposed to be doing, which is to encourage the growth of democratic rule. So now you have a we have a system that's produced people who, a candidate in the Democratic Party who can't even defend America's record in the world, and who is parroting this kind of warmongering, military domination ideology that's gotten us in such trouble. It's caused a calamity in our country. It's gutted the middle class. It's made us a pariah around the globe. It led to the rise of BRICS. It's leading to the rise of totalitarianism all over the world. And I say this finally that if you really look at what's happening in the Democratic Party today, it's a party that the word demos in Greek means people. But it's a party that's lost faith in the people. It's a party that needs ironclad control. So they didn't trust anybody to have a real election. They got rid of the primaries because they didn't trust the people. They then handpicked Vice President Harris with no election, no even pretense of election, because they didn't trust the people. And they're the party now of censorship. And
How can you have a democracy with censorship?
you cannot have a democracy, and they're absolutely incompatible. And everybody knew that. You and I were raised reading Orwell and Aldous Huxley and Robert Heinlein and Alexander Solzhenitsyn and all of these other books that were part of classical literature that was taught in every American classroom. It said the first step to totalitarianism is always, because with censorship, it's the first step in that slippery slope. There's no time that we look back in history and say the people who were censoring speech were the good guys. They're always the bad guys, because we know that they're the guys who are going to end up cracking the whip on us all and being our overlords. And then the whole thing about, like, you and I talked about that clip of Tim Walz, Governor Walz, saying that government should be the ultimate arbiter of what is protected speech and what is not. He said if something that the First Amendment does not protect, misinformation and disinformation, but it does. The First Amendment was written to protect not only true speech but false speech, and speech that it wasn't there and it's unnecessary, to protect the kind of speech that everybody wants to hear. It's there to protect the kind of speech that nobody wants to hear.
Right, and especially speech that is critical of the people in charge.
Exactly.
So in their current formulation, misinformation is defined as any speech that criticizes the job that they're doing. So with that in mind, you see the Biden administration encouraging France, Macron, to arrest the owner and founder of Telegram, Pavel Durov, who's now, as of right now, in a French prison. That seems like, that's the hallmark of dictatorship, it sounds to me.
Yeah, well, we've lost Europe. Europe does not have free speech. Look what's happened to Elon Musk in Europe. Elon Musk should be the hero of the Democratic Party. The old Democratic Party, he would be the hero. Somehow he became a villain because he was actually the only platform that would allow free speech on his platform. And he's now become a villain because of it, because the Democratic Party does not believe in the people. If you don't believe in free speech, it means because you don't trust the people. You don't trust them to figure it out on their own, to have information on which they can base their ideas and their notions, their beliefs,
And their votes.
and that the government has to protect them from dangerous information, on things that might put bad ideas into their heads. And it's very patronizing, but it's also very manipulative and conniving, and really it's exactly the opposite of democracy. And you will not find a single Democrat who will criticize it. It's really astonishing to me, because the Democrats always, when I endorsed Trump, the big it's kind of the fulcrum of the centerpiece of the text of hatred that I got back, this kind of seething anger. So many Democrats was, well, look what he did on January 6th. Okay, January 6th was a bad day in American history. And what President Trump did there, in my view, was very bad. It was reprehensible. But was the Republic really at risk? You know, with the U.S. military, with the National Guard, you have all the institutions, we have Congress, we have all these institutions of government, and there was a mob of people, most of them who probably didn't know what was happening. Some of them were very badly intentioned and were breaking the law. But it wasn't a threat to the Republic. What is a threat, and this is what you cannot explain to a Democrat now, and it's astonishing to me. What is a threat is when the government is censoring your speech, political speech. And I just won Tucker last week.
But that was the centerpiece of Democratic ideology, was free speech.
Exactly. I mean, the word liberal means free speech. That's where it comes from. Oh,
That must be weird for you, being named Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and spending your entire life in this world. Like, what's that like?
Let me just say this. I won a lawsuit. I won a new judgment in my lawsuit, Kennedy versus Biden, last week. And Kennedy versus Biden was part of two lawsuits that were brought, one by the attorney generals of Missouri and Louisiana, and the other by me, for the same issues, which was the Biden administration's censorship of speech. And so there's a series of decisions. There's a 155-page decision. The attorney general's case went up to the Supreme Court and was rejected because the Supreme Court found that those attorney generals didn't have standing to sue because they weren't directly harmed. My case this week, the federal judge Doty said Kennedy does have standing to sue. And he reissued his injunction against the Biden administration. So I have an injunction right now against the Biden White House to enjoin them from censoring me, which they've been doing. The 155-page decision by Judge Doty details everything that happened. 37 hours after he took the oath of office, President Biden's White House opened up a portal for the FBI to begin to have access to social media posts on all the different social media sites. And the FBI then invited in the CIA, the DHS, the IRS, and CISA. CISA is this new agency that is the center of the censorship industrial complex that is in charge of making sure Americans don't hear things that their government doesn't want them to hear. And those agencies and other agencies, including the health agencies like CDC, were given access to go into the social media sites and change posts and slow walk things and shadow ban posts. That it was part of that effort. They removed my Instagram account. I had almost 1 million followers. They say it was for misinformation, but they could not point to a single post that I ever made that was factually erroneous. And they actually, Facebook pushed back in the email chain. You can see Facebook pushing back at the White House and saying, well, wait a minute, he's not, this isn't misinformation. This is not factually erroneous. What they're saying is actually true. And they had to invent a new word, which is called malinformation, which is information that is factually true, but nevertheless inconvenient for the government. And that became disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation. That's what that is. So everybody, and
Isn't that that's illegal?
yeah, and the emails show that Facebook, the people said they were saying about the White House in their private emails with each other. These people are cynical, terrible people, and they knew what they were doing was breaking the law. But they were under tremendous pressure. I mean, Facebook has all these deals with the government, and as do all the media companies with the intelligence agencies and elsewhere. Plus, they were the White House was overtly telling them that they were going to, if they didn't comply, that their Section 230 immunity was in jeopardy. So Section 230 immunity is the, just so that your listeners know what it is. I used to write for the New York Times regularly. Every time I wrote an article, lawyers would call me and fact check everything in that article. Because if I wrote something that was defamatory in that article and somebody was defamed, that person could sue me, but they could also sue the New York Times. So the social media site said, we cannot hire lawyers to look at every post and call the people and check on it when, on Facebook or Instagram. So if this industry is going to function, we need to be able to not be liable for what is published on our site. And that is called Section 230 of the Communications Act. And Congress said, if you are just a platform, a mere platform, that for other people to publish, like Facebook is, like Instagram, like Twitter or X, that you're immune. Nobody can sue you. They can sue the person who wrote the post, but they can't sue Facebook. So Mark Zuckerberg said, if they take away our Facebook, our Section 230 immunity, it is existential, meaning we will no longer exist. And so they were terrified because Congress was actually considering removing Section 230 immunity, and the White House was telling them, if you don't censor our political critics, we're going to take away your Section 230 immunity. If President Trump did that, the Democrats would go berserk.
Well, that's criminal behavior. Anyone who does that is a criminal.
Right? They're violating the First Amendment, the Constitution, for starters.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened. And my idea is that if somebody does something bad, it shouldn't matter whether they're Democrat or Republican.
I agree.
It is, we should all be going after them, and we should be going after them as a society.
The big tech companies censor our content. I hate to tell you that it's still going on in 2024, but you know what they can't censor? Live events. And that's why we are hitting the road on a fall tour for the entire month of September, coast to coast. We will be in cities across the United States. We'll be in Phoenix with Russell Brand, Anaheim, California with Vivek Ramaswamy, Colorado Springs with Tulsi Gabbard, Salt Lake City with Glenn Beck, Tulsa, Oklahoma with Dan Bongino, Kansas City with Megyn Kelly, Wichita with Charlie Kirk, Milwaukee with Larry Elder, Rosenberg, Texas with Jesse Kelly, Grand Rapids with Kid Rock, Hershey, Pennsylvania with J.D. Vance, Reading, Pennsylvania with Alex Jones, Fort Worth, Texas with Roseanne Barr, Greenville, South Carolina with Marjorie Taylor Greene, Sunrise, Florida with John Rich, Jacksonville, Florida with Donald Trump Jr. You can get tickets at tuckercarlson.com. Hope to see you there.
What I don't understand, and it is baffling to me, having known a lot of Democrats, but you've been in that world your whole life, like, how do they not see that? How do people who say they believe in civil liberties suddenly think it's okay for the government to prosecute its political opponents and silence them? How do they think that?
To me, I've thought a lot about that.
I bet.
And it's about tribalism. And that people put themselves in these tribal categories, and we're hardwired for tribalism. That's why orthodoxies are so popular, that, people get sucked into various kind of orthodoxies, whether it's ideological orthodoxies or religious orthodoxies. And that impulse it's not a religious impulse, it's a biological impulse, and it's an impulse that's hardwired in us from the 20,000 generations we spent wandering the African savannah in tiny little groups that were warring each other, where there was always a male leader, where the women were traded as chattels because you couldn't marry your sister. So you knew from the beginning she was going to be a trade good, and you were going to trade her for somebody else. But she had no power. And where you all have to ascribe to an orthodoxy and see no problems with people who are within your in-group. and people who are outside were subhuman and they could be killed. And if they made a mistake, you wanted to talk about it, everybody would talk about it. We're all hardwired that way because that's where our wiring comes from. And when somebody gets subsumed in orthodoxy, it's very, very difficult to unravel it. And there are all kinds of psychiatric treatises about how do you deprogram somebody. How do you talk somebody out of an orthodoxy? And the little that I know about it is that if you challenge them directly, it pours concrete on it, and it makes them less able to move off that, or they get very defensive. And that, the way to approach them, there are ways to approach them. There's deprogramming protocols, and they usually include a lot of Socratic method of asking them questions about their belief. But it's a one-on-one, project enterprise. And it's not something that you can do with the whole Democratic Party overnight. Something has to happen that's going to make this tribal thinking unravel, because it's really destroying our country. And the polarization, which is happening on both sides, is put on steroids by these social media algorithms that reward people for staying on the site as long as possible. So the algorithm, all the algorithm knows is I've got to keep as many eyeballs on the site as possible. It turns out that the way people stay on the site is if you fortify their existing opinions. Of course. If you feed them information that consolidates their worldview.
Yes.
And so, we have this problem now where it's not just polarization like the Civil War, but it's polarization on steroids, because you've got machines that are manipulating us to hate each other more every single day.
So knowing all this as you do and have for a long time, the most radical step you can make if you're a Democrat is endorsing Donald Trump. So there are political calculations involved, there are ideological calculations, but there are also, of course, personal calculations. So once you do that, you've burned your votes. Like, that's it. You're not going back to wherever you were 10 years ago. How hard a decision was that for you personally?
It was an obvious decision for me. It should have been, but it was a very, very difficult decision. And we had, I have a very, very good team around me, and I was most worried about my wife, who was Cheryl, who it was not comfortable with it. She's a lifelong Democrat. She's not the aristocracy. She comes from a very, I would say, poor family in North Florida, but she found her way through idealism to the Democratic Party, and she shares a lot of those values. So and her industry is very, very much aligned with the Democratic Party, probably more than any industry in our country and more than any town in our country. This, for me, was likely to have huge impacts on her. And ultimately, if she had told me, "You can't do this," I wouldn't have done it. So, but I'm very grateful that she allowed me to do it. She was not embracing it, but she said, "I understand why you have to do this." And we had a 4-day meeting up in Hyannisport, my home, where kind of everybody, my family members, my kids, many other people, Tony Robbins, attended remotely, and a number of other kind of spiritual leaders, just people who care deeply about our country, chimed in and made cases on both sides. Now, people from the campaign organization did. But here was the calculus that ultimately was persuasive for me. All of our internal polling showed from the outset that if I had stayed in the Democratic Party, I was going to get Vice President Harris elected. 57 to 60%, and even more, sometimes up to 66% of my voters So my followers said that if I withdrew from the election, they were going to vote for Trump, which is ironic, by the way, Tucker, because President Trump and the RNC did nothing to prevent me from being on the ballots. They didn't have a big major organization sending private eyes out. You know, the Democratic Party was interviewing literally everybody I've ever met in 70 years to collect dirt on me. I got a call.
They've been doing that, I know for a fact, for over a year.
Yeah, and they were open about it. This is what we're going to do. They put a person in charge of it named Liz Smith, who's, that's the kind of person she is. This is what she does. She does negative research on people and tries to characterize
Is
them.
this Smith Elliott Spitzer's old girlfriend?
Yes. And she was in charge of that team. And then there was other people as well. Mary Beth Cahill had been my uncle Teddy's chief of staff, who I knew. And Liz Smith was in charge of the negative research, what they call negative research, euphemistically. And I got calls from, for example, a guy that I met at an AA meeting 40 years ago, and he received a call. Most of my family members received calls, contacts, either text or telephone calls from people who said, I'm doing intelligence for the DNC, and we'd like to talk to you about Robert Kennedy, and if you have any negative information about it. So I was getting that.
What could possibly be the justification for that?
Well, they didn't want me running, and that's the thing, is it's not democratic. It wasn't,
That's such a mafia tactic.
Yeah. So, but the point is, it was weird. It was not smart, because I was actually helping the Democrats, and if they just let me stay in and they didn't run this campaign against me, they probably would win this election. And because I was hurting Trump, oddly, Trump didn't do anything about it. He was kind of, he made a couple statements about me, that I was a communist, etc. But they were sort of good-natured, the stuff that you're like, okay, that's okay. I weren't like calling my old girlfriend saying, what did he do, or, whatever they were asking him. So, but the DNC was up to that, and
Were you shocked by that?
was I shocked? I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm in a place now where nothing surprises me.
I bet you are.
So, but I don't know. I mean, anyway. So
You're gonna drop all that stuff now, obviously, right?
What? That they're gonna get rid of Liz Smith and put her on some other project? I don't know.
You sort of wonder, how does Liz Smith live with herself? I mean, that's so repulsive. Like, how does she justify that to herself? It matters, she's not stupid, but that is disgusting. No, you've lived a life famously, and if you have a team of researchers digging into it.
And I have not led a careful life, by the way.
Well, I know.
I said, my first, during my announcement speech, I said, I had told my wife told Cheryl this a couple days before. I said, I have so many skeletons in my closet that if they could vote, I could run for king of the world. I know stuff's going to come out about me because I let me put it, a colorful life.
Yeah.
And people have all kinds of stories about me, but so I'm ready for, I've never done anything criminal in terms of stealing money or self-enrichment. I did a lot of stupid stuff and a lot of.
Have you gotten rich off pointless foreign wars?
No, I have not done that yet.
Oh, you haven't? Okay. You haven't forced people to inject substances in their bodies? Okay.
I've never done any of that. But anyway, so it became clear to me that if Kamala got elected, the issues that I cared about, which is ending the foreign wars, the unjust wars, the immoral wars, the wars of choice like Ukraine, stopping the censorship, which I think is existential for our democracy, and then protecting children from this extraordinary exploding chronic disease epidemic. Those are the three reasons that got me into the campaign. That's why I ran for president. Those are three reasons. And if she got elected, I'm 70 years old. That 8 years from now, our kids are going to be lost. And if she's president for 8 years, my chance to do anything about it would be gone.
Yes.
And then I got a contact from Callie Means, who you know well,
Yes.
you've made one of the best shows ever put on TV, ever aired, was your interview with Callie and his wife, Casey. And Callie, for those of you who haven't seen the show, his show is an expert, a genius, brilliant, articulate, eloquent, and incredible encyclopedic knowledge on the food system and what is corrupting it, what is causing the corruption at FDA and USDA, that the capture of those agencies by the processed food industry, by the chemical industry, by the pharmaceutical industry, that actually profit on sick children. And one of the things that Callie said is, there is nothing more profitable in our society today than a sick child, because all of these entities are making money on the insurance companies, the hospitals, the medical cartel, the pharmaceutical companies that have lifetime annuities. I mean, any child and the earlier that kid is sick, they don't want to kill him. They want him sick for the rest of their lives. And we have now a whole generation. When my uncle was president, 6% of Americans had chronic disease. Today it's 60%. When my uncle was president, do you know what the annual cost of treating chronic disease was in this country? Zero. There weren't even any drugs invented for it. Zero. Today it's about $4.3 trillion.
When your uncle was president,
and none of it is necessary.
what was the autism rate in 1960? Do you know?
In 1960, the autism rate, there's about 4 or 5 studies, and the highest rate, say about 1 in 2,500, 1 in 1,500, 1 in 2,500, 1 in 10,000. So that, it was somewhere between 1 in 1,500 and 1 in 10,000. Today it's 1 in every 34 kids, according to the CDC, and in some states, like California, I think maybe Utah and New Jersey, 1 in 22. 1 in 22 kids. And, these kids should be healthy. These kids should be our highest performing kids. And they instead are have this extraordinary disability that's going to keep them dependent and not, a lot of these, if you're full-blown autism, it's a nonverbal, non-toilet trained, head banging, stimming, toe walking. These are kids that will never throw a baseball. They'll never graduate high school. They'll never go out and take a girl on a date. They'll never use the toilet alone. They'll never write a play. They'll never write a poem. They'll never vote.
Never have children.
Never pay taxes.
So that just seems like such an emergency.
And for me, that, if I could save one of these kids, it would be worth giving my life for it. I'm 70 years old. To save one kid at birth, it would be worth dying for. And to the opportunity and the need for me to save all of these kids, I would do anything for it. I would literally do anything for it.
We were talking breakfast. I'm sure your perception is different because we're talking about you, but for 15 years anyway, there was not a single story about you that didn't dismiss you as a dangerous crackpot for questioning why autism is much more common than it once was. Much more, exponentially more common. And you've written a lot about this, and you were attacked. I don't see those attacks very much anymore.
Well, they're still in the mainstream media. That's still part of the litany of my crimes. But anybody who uses their head, and that's one of the reasons they won't let me speak on the media. When Ross Perot ran, he was running for 10 months. He was on mainstream media 34 times interviews. And you remember him, it seemed like he was on Larry King every week.
Of course.
And I got, in 16 months, I had 2 live interviews on all of those networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, 2. They're just basically mouthpieces now for the DNC. And there was this obligatory litany of defamations and pejoratives that were used to describe me anytime my name was mentioned, that I was not a crackpot, I was like a supervillain. And I'm not complaining because that's just, I knew what I was getting into. But anyway, the idea that I had these meetings with President Trump, and they were partly because of you. You were the one who, Callie Means called me about, I'd say 3 hours after President Trump was shot. Callie Means called me, although it doesn't seem possible because, but I think it was only 3 hours after his shooting.
It was Saturday night.
Yeah, Saturday night, and Callie Means said to me, he told me, Callie had been advising me for a long time and my campaign. He told me that night, I've been advising President Trump, which delighted me because I thought, oh my gosh, there's another candidate beside me that is listening to the truth. And he said that there was interest in the Trump campaign by the president of including me, and then he talked about vice president, which I wasn't interested in. But he said, would you be interested in talking with with President Trump? And I said, I don't think so. And part of this was I just thought it was a non-starter with Cheryl. And I called Cheryl up, and she said to me, you should hear them out. And I immediately called Callie. I texted Callie back and said, I'm interested. And then I got a text from you. And you and I have each other's cell phones. And you had an unknown cell phone number, which you had linked me into, which was President Trump's number. And you said, he's waiting for your call. And so I called him that night. I had a great conversation with him, and then he asked, or we decided to talk. And I met him the next day. He was at that point at Bedminster, which is his golf course and home in New Jersey. And he'd driven there from Butler, where he had been shot. And then I went to, and so I flew out to Minneapolis the next day. And I had probably a 2-hour meeting with him and Amaryllis, who's my daughter-in-law, who is running my campaign, the smartest person I've ever met, and Cheryl and Susie Wiles. And it was a really interesting meeting because he was so open about first of all, not liking the neocons.
Yeah.
And, I never imagined that because for me, he was the guy who brought John Bolton and Mike Pompeo into office. And, but he was really disillusioned with them, to say the least, And then, he was deeply interested and well-informed, as he is on any, as much as he is on any subject, about what's happening to our kids about chronic disease. And then he was absolutely adamant about stopping the censorship and, and making sure that we had free speech. And so we talked a little then and didn't really come to any, talked about the possibility of working together. After that, but then we put it on hold. They wanted me to do something at the convention. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And we still, at that point, there was still a chance that I could get into the debate. That chance was diminishing. And because I was not allowed on any media, and because, my only chance of winning the election, I believe I would have won if I had gotten on the debate stage. But my only chance was to get on the debate stage. And that possibility was vanishing. So I was looking at kind of my options. I then contacted Harris's campaign because I thought I should talk to them and see if they're interested in any of these issues, which I suspected they were not because the Camelin was still an empty slate. Kamala, excuse me, was an empty slate. So,
She's pronounced it both ways herself, so it's okay.
I'm gonna respect people and give them,
Yes.
So I reached out to her, and I reached out to a number of people, including some relatives of mine who are very, very close to her personally and to the Democratic Party, and they just said, that's a non-starter. There's no way in the world that she's gonna talk to you. And they said, we can get you a meeting with a low-level campaign official. And I said, okay, I'm not interested in that.
Why wouldn't, it's interesting, why wouldn't Kamala Harris meet with you?
Maybe the same reason that she hasn't given an interview. I think it seems to me that there's a lot of handlers involved. And even when you talk to Democrats about, do you really think it's a good idea to be electing somebody who cannot give an interview? They say, well, you're not electing her, you're electing the people around her. You're electing the apparatus. And the apparatus I don't have any faith in. It's an apparatus that are neocons like Anthony Blinken and who are, running us right up into World War III. And there are people who mastermind the censorship from inside the White House. That's the apparatus that they want to re-elect. And to me, that's an apparatus that has these are the people who are censoring me. These are the people who try to throw me out of the party, who canceled the primaries. That's the apparatus. If it was a Democrat who said, I can think on my own, I understand what this country's supposed to look like, I understand what democracy is supposed to look like, then I think that's great, let's do that.
But it's strange from her perspective. First of all, electing an apparatus is not how democracy works. That's an oligarchy, just point of fact. But as a political calculation, your presence in the race running third party hurt Trump. No one disputes that. Paul's really clear on that. So if you're the Harris campaign, kind of a win, right? To get some alignment with you, why? Even human curiosity, you'd think, would compel her to want to meet with you. Like, take a meeting. Like, why do you care? But she wouldn't even talk to you. I think it's very weird.
It's weird, but I can't stress enough, not being able to give an interview. Your whole life is in public life. That's what you do. That is the I give, this day is a really slow day because I'm doing one interview with you. On a typical day, I do about 7 or 8 interviews, some days 10 or 12. And I do that every day, and I've done that for 16 months. If anybody who wants to go, we have a list now, 4,000 people want to interview me, but I'm interviewing as many people as possible. Because I want to get my voice out, my vision out, my concerns out. And it's incomprehensible to me that you would be in public life. And President Trump does the same thing. He's not scared of an interview.
No, he likes it.
Theo Vaughn.
Yeah.
He's done you. He does anybody. He does people who don't agree with him. He's not censoring you.
No.
He's doing, he's talking to reporters who write crappy articles about him all the time. From New York Magazine.
Maggie Haberman at the New York Times.
Maggie Haberman has never written a nice word about Donald Trump, and he talks to her how often?
A lot.
Yeah, a lot. So, it's, my Uncle Teddy, who was exactly opposite of Ronald Reagan, ideologically, and he ran against Carter.
Yeah.
That he did. And Carter and he had an antipathy toward each other that was almost, like nothing I'd ever seen. Teddy didn't hate people, but he really, I would say, loathed Carter. He had complete disdain for him, and he then he liked Reagan. And because I was more ideologically aligned at that point, I'd say to him, why do you like Reagan? And he said, because even though I don't agree with anything he said, he was able to invigorate our country. He was able to inspire people. He got people excited about his vision and proud to be Americans. And that is one of the functions of a president, is to explain to us why we should be proud of each other and why we're part of a community and why our country is great and what our future is going to look like, and get us and inspire all of us with that vision. And that is what a real leader does. How in the world can you do that if you cannot give an interview to a newsworthy,
To a friendly newsworthy.
to a friendly newsworthy? They can't even do a setup interview in 40 days. I saw the only interview she did that was unscripted was when she got off a plane. I think it was at Andrews Air Force Base, and there was a reporter waiting there, and with one question, when are you going to do an interview? And she said, I've told my team that to try to get one done before September. This was the 3rd of August. And I'm doing 7 or 8 interviews a
August
day.
is almost up, so you have to get
And
my interview.
I'm not, blowing my own horn or anything. I'm just saying that's what you do if you're in public life. And what's the point of being in public life if you don't want to promote your vision? If you don't want to inspire people?
Well, I'm sure this is a sensitive subject, but I can't help but notice that you ran for 15 months with no Secret Service protection at all. You were denied that by the administration.
Yeah.
Trump, during the convention in Milwaukee last month, noted that in public. They immediately, under pressure, responded and gave you Secret Service protection.
Yes.
Now they've withdrawn it. You're without it again.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yes.
Meanwhile, Tony Fauci has it. He's not a federal employee anymore. I think Mike Pompeo has Secret Service protection, former CIA director. But you don't. How is that?
I think I'm technically still running for president. I'm running for president in 30 states, 40 states. So I'm not. I did not terminate my campaign. Did you know this?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. So I'm running in there's 10 states where I heard President Trump, and they're battleground states. Oh, I've taken my name off the ballot in those 10 states. But in the blue states, all red states, I'm on the ballot. And I could technically win a contingency election if the other two vote, if the other two get 269 apiece, and then Congress cannot work out compromise, which is entirely possible. They have to go to the third vote getter, which would be me, and that's why I left my name on the ballot in those states. And so, that's highly unlikely to happen, but it has happened twice before in American history. And actually, in our polling now, shows them at exactly 269 to 269. Oh, it is possible that it would happen in this campaign. We worked this out with the Trump campaign. They only wanted us off in 10 states. Because that's the states we heard of. In the other states, people can vote for me, and they're not going to hurt their candidate. They can vote for me even if they like Vice President Harris, and without hurting her, and they can vote for me if they like President Trump without hurting him, because we already know what's going to happen in those states.
Yes.
Oh,
So all the more reason that you should have what Tony Fauci has and what Mike Pompeo has, and a lot of other, by the way, non-current federal employees have, which is government bodyguards, but
Yeah.
they withdrew them immediately from you. So what's the message of that?
Well, the message, I think, is a bad message, which is that our federal enforcement agencies have been weaponized against the American people. I mean, again, weaponized politically, not against the American people, but politically. When my father took office in the Justice Department, and my father was appointed the U.S. Attorney General in 1961 by my uncle, his brother. And my father, the first week in office, he had run my uncle's campaign, so he's a political guy. He called together all the division chairs, all the branch chiefs in the DOJ, and he made it into his big cavernous office. And he said to them, we're going to make one rule here, which is there is no politics. We never ask whether a potential defendant is Democrat or Republican. The people of this country have to know that their enforcement institutions, the Department of Justice, the justice is blind here. That we are free of any kind of political prejudice or bias or favoritism. And they started putting in jail. He prosecuted my uncle on my mother's side for antitrust violation. He prosecuted friends of his father's. His father did not want him to prosecute. And they just said, it doesn't matter. We've got to apply it even handily, because the American people need to understand that their institutions aren't free. We need to respect them and know that they're not biased in one way. And we're losing that now in our country. And the Biden administration has really accelerated that. The most shocking thing to me, and Democrats can't even hear this story because it touches so many sort of culture war buttons, but it's a true story. People need to understand it and appreciate it. In the 2020 election, when Hunter Biden's laptop a week before and we only know this whole story recently because of the release of documents, but when President Hunter Biden's laptop suddenly became an issue about a week before the debate, and Anthony Blinken, who is now the Secretary of State, and who was then the director of President Biden's campaign, went to Gina Haspel, who is the head of this director of the CIA, and said to her, we need help with this. She then got 51 CIA, current and former CIA officers to sign a public letter, which they published, I think, in the New York Times, but they published it somewhere, that said that Hunter Biden's laptop was a Russian hoax that was part of a Russian disinformation effort to tamper with the presidential election campaign. So you had the CIA, which is forbidden by its charter from involving itself in any American politics. And you had 51 top officers, former and current, who now do a disinformation campaign against the American public to tamper with the election, while accusing the Russians of tampering with the election. And then a week later, President Biden, when he's asked about the laptop on the debate, he says that has been debunked by the CIA, by these CIA officers. And that was the end of the issue, because it was debunked. All the newspapers picked that up. And it's highly likely that that had an impact on the election. So, that was the entree of President Biden getting into office. And again, Democrats who hear me say this story are going to say, oh, he's just saying that because, he's a Republican now, right? Which I'm not, but that's what they're going to say. But it's not that. It's just that this was wrong.
So the CIA, a lot of roads lead back, unfortunately, to our most powerful intelligence agency. If you were asked, would you run it? Would you become CIA director if you were asked?
I would never get, yes, I would, but I would never get Senate confirmation. As you know, the intelligence agency are protected by very, very powerful committees in the Senate and in the House that are already into the project, and the people who serve on those committees are people who would, they're just safeguarding that directorship, and I would be very, very dangerous for those those committees. So I don't think that.
And yet, in his, in your joint appearance on Friday, President Trump introduced you by saying that he plans to, if elected, establish a commission to declassify the remaining documents surrounding your uncle's murder in 1963.
Yeah.
And I think everyone at this point knows the truth, which is the CIA is implicated in that. Those documents protect CIA, maybe among others.
Well, whether they do or not, it's odd that they've not allowed them to be released.
What could possibly be the
More
explanation?
than 60 years after my uncle's death, almost 65 years, 62 years after his death. And none of the people who were implicated in that crime are alive now.
Yes.
The last ones have died off in the last year or two. And so it clearly is to protect the institution.
Yes.
And that's wrong. It's just wrong. And it's wrong for a Democrat and it's wrong for Republicans.
It's just interesting, though, that a bipartisan list of presidents, although these 6 decades, have kept those files classified.
Well, you and I have both. I was astonished that Trump didn't declassify them because he promised it during the campaign.
That was Mike Pompeo who did that.
Yeah, and that I talked to President Trump for the first time about that this week. And
What did he say?
He said that Mike Pompeo begged him to. I don't think I'm telling tales out of school here.
No,
I think he told the same thing to you.
That's
right?
true.
But he said Mike Pompeo called him and said this would be a catastrophe to release these. You need to not do it. And that,
I want to say again, I think Mike Pompeo is a criminal. So that's my view. He's starting to sue me for saying that, but I hope he will, because it's true. But that kind of tells the whole story right there, right? That the CIA is.
well, yeah, but that's the
Why would the CIA be trying to keep these files classified if they had nothing to do with the murder? I don't really get that.
Yeah, but the subject we were talking about was the weaponization of the federal agency, and that's just one of them. And then they get, then they open up these censorship portals 37 hours after President Biden takes office, where now you have the FBI involved in American politics, and which we ran them out in the 60s, because we were outraged that they were bugging Martin Luther King, the Black Panther Party, and Americans were indignant about that. Why do they think this? I mean, have we gotten to the point where it's so normalized and now we're okay with the FBI running a portal to censor political speech in our country and then inviting in the CIA and the CISA and the IRS? I don't know what they were doing in there.
I think
And NIH and, CDC and all these other agencies, DHS, which all had a hand in censoring American speech. So that was another thing. And then the use, which we saw for the first time in American history of the judiciary to get rid of candidates. What they tried to do to me, they're suing me now in a dozen states. I've been in trials for the past 3 weeks. I've spent most of my time not campaigning. But sitting in court in cases that are trying to get me off the ballot. So, I had 1 million people, 1 million American citizens sign petitions, more than any candidate in history. Everybody said I'd never do this, impossible to be in the ballot in 50 states. Well, guess what? We got on the ballot in 50 states. And we did it by getting 1 million citizens to sign petitions saying that they wanted to vote for me. And the Democratic Party now is suing me in all those states to make sure that those people cannot vote for the person they wanted. When I was growing up, the Democratic Party of RFK and JFK was the party that was fighting for voting rights. It was fighting to make sure that every American could vote for the candidate of their choice, no matter whether they're black or white or where they lived, or Democrat or Republican. Now the Democratic Party, today's Democratic Party, feels so unconfident about the candidates that it's putting forward. And it feels the only way it can win the election is by getting rid of the opponents. And either using the courts against President Trump to lock him in jail and to embarrass and humiliate and discredit him, or using the courts against me to just to throw me off the ballot, even though the voters, New York State, I had to get 45,000 ballot signatures in 13 congressional districts. I got 137,000 in all 26 congressional districts. I did twice when anybody wanted, and we did it easily because people wanted to see me on the ballot. New Yorkers wanted to see me on the ballot. Why is the Democratic Party suing me in frivolous cases? I spent a whole week in a trial for that case, for 2 cases they brought, and another week in another trial for another case.
Did you pay for this?
It's costing me $10 million to defend myself.
But on what grounds are they suing you? Like they don't like you, so you don't have a right to be on the ballot, or what?
In New York State, they're suing me by, they can't challenge our signatures because we got 5 times as many signatures as we required. So that, normally what they were doing in the first days, they're taking our signatures and they were calling everybody. They can get their numbers and they can get their, cell phones, etc. And we're contacting everybody who's saying that and trying to talk them out of it, trying to get them to say, you're hurting democracy, and you should, weren't you fooled when you did this, to try to get it? But they never succeeded. They're in New York State. They're suing me because they say that I don't live in New York State. So I have 3 residences. One is in New York. One is in my home in Massachusetts, which, is part of my family compound that we've owned for, 100 years. And then in California, where I live with Cheryl. So I moved with Cheryl to California in 2014, so 10 years ago. But I lived in New York my life. I lived there since I was 10. My father ran for Senate there and was the senator. I moved there when I was 10. I've only voted in New York. I've always considered myself a New York resident. I've lived in the same town for 40 years in Bedford. I've lived in 13 different residences in that town at various times. But I always wanted to stay there. And when I moved out west with Cheryl, I made an agreement with her that, when she retires, we're going to go back to New York, because I feel like I'm a New Yorker. I didn't want to vote in California because I don't know anything about the politics out there. I was raised in New York. I know all the politics, all the politicians. And so I wanted to vote. So I kept an address there. I voted that address. That's my only place I've ever voted. My car is registered there. My driver's license is there. My law office is there. I pay income tax, almost all my income tax from New York State. My law license is there. I don't have a law license in California. And my hunting license is there. My fishing license
Most
is there.
importantly,
My falconry license is there. So I have all my birds there. I keep them there. And so, but they're suing me saying I'm not a real New Yorker. I contrived the address out of fraud and it's a sham. And here's the thing, is that I consulted a lawyer when we declared independent and began getting ballot signatures. I consulted the best ballot access attorney in the country, Paul Rossi. And I said, I got these 3 different residences. Which one do I put on the ballot? You have to put the same residence in all 50 states. So you can't choose another resident. I can't put California in one state and Massachusetts in another state in New York. I have to tell the people, otherwise I'm lying to somebody, right?
Right.
Oh, in a couple of states, for example, Maine, where we are right now, and in New Hampshire, those states say the only place you can put down as your domicile is the place where you vote. And in New Hampshire, I actually had to take an oath in front of a notary that I voted in New York, because otherwise they couldn't have put it down. So I had to put New York in every state because I had to put it in Maine, New Hampshire, and a bunch of others, because you have to put the place you vote. Anyway, the DNC is suing me, saying I defrauded the public because I really live in California, and they got a judge who was right out of the Democratic machine, and who violated the Constitution and every precedent to say, yeah, they're right. So, I lost in the lower court, which is what happens. We're doing that. We're losing in these lower courts, and then we win in the appeals. There's a 100% chance I'll win in the appeal, but they don't care. This is going to take me a while, and they get the headline saying he was thrown off for fraud.
So I saw Kamala Harris just the other night at her convention speech talk about how voting access and stuff. Yeah.
I know. While she was doing that, I was in court in New York. And I'm trying to get on that ballot while that, the entire...
The John Lewis Voting Access Act, we're going to get everybody has a right to vote.
Yeah, it's not.
Except for their opponents. So it feels to me like this is, obviously it's a big political story. You're endorsing Trump. It's a big change in your life as a lifelong Democrat, still a Democrat. But it also feels like, as you said at the outset.
Well, I'm an independent now, so I registered as an independent when I ran. And when I talked with President Trump, the thing that we talked about is that, if we were going to do a unity government with the independent, not the kind of endorsement that a lot of people made. An endorsement like Abraham Lincoln's team of rivals, where we would be able to continue to differ publicly on issues, but that we would, on the issues that we agree on, that we were going to strive to get into government together in order to make sure that those issues are the priority for our country. And, he was really good about that, and about, me being able to continue on. There's some issues, there's a lot of issues like the border where we agree, and, censorship, the wars, the neocons, the, forever wars, child health epidemics, those are the most important issues. There's other issues that I'm going to disagree on with President Trump, but he was happy with that, and that's how our country ought to be. We ought to be able to.
So what is this realignment that you mentioned at the outset? Because this does feel like it's bigger than just this November.
Yeah, there's been a series of these realignments throughout American history, and there's history books that are written about the realignments. I think there's about 5 of them. And one of those is clearly happening now, because you see on so many issues, that you've had an inversion. The Democratic Party has become the party of the elites. It used to be the party of the poor and the working class. In fact, there was a study that came out just recently that I saw that showed that 70%, that the people who voted for Biden own 70% of the wealth in this country. The people who voted for Trump own 30%. And so...
I believe that.
Right. So you're seeing this realignment happen where the elites, where Wall Street, where the big tech, big pharma, the big banking houses are all now Democratic. And that the working class, the middle class, the cops, the firefighters, Sean O'Brien, the head of the Teamsters Union, the spoke guy. That's a great guy, great guy. Really love him. But he spoke at the Democratic convention. The Republican convention rather than the Democratic convention. So you're seeing this big alignment, and even on environmental issues. It's so weird to me because the Democrats have become subsumed in this carbon orthodoxy, and you and I have talked about this, that the only issue is carbon. And what that's done is it's forced them to do something that you should never do if you're an environmentalist, which is to commoditize and quantify everything. So everything is measured by its carbon footprint, how many tons of carbon it produces, and you're basically you're putting everything in that kind of box of being able to quantify it and explain its value by numerically. And the reason we protect the environment is just the opposite of that. The reason that we protect the environment is because there's a spiritual connection. There's a love that we have. I got into the environment because I wanted, this connection to the fishes and the birds and the wildlife and the whales and the Purple Mountains majesty, and that, I understood that the way, God talks to human beings through many vectors, through each other, through organized religion, through the great prophets, through the wise people, the great books of those religions, but nowhere with the kind of detail and texture and grace and joy as through creation. And when we destroy nature, we diminish our capacity to sense the divine, understand who God is and what our own potential is and duties are as human beings. And that,
I hope what you just said, by the way, is chopped up and put all over every social media platform in the world. When we destroy nature, we degrade our own ability to experience the divine.
yeah, and that, it's not about quantifying stuff. That's what the devil does. He quantifies everything, right? And that is, what he wants us doing. Put a number on it. And the reason we're preserving these things is because we love our children, and it's because we get nature enriches us economically and spiritually and culturally and historically. It connects us to those 10,000 generations of human beings that were here before there were laptops. And it connects us to the most important spiritual lesson of all of the organized religions that we know of today. The central revelation of every one of those religions always occurred in the wilderness. Moses had to go into the wilderness to listen to hear God's voice and see the burning bush. He had to go to the wilderness of Mount Sinai to get the commandments. Muhammad who was a city boy from Mecca, had to go to the wilderness of Mount Hera on a camping trip with his kids and wrestle with the angel Gabriel in the middle of the night to have the first stanzas of the surahs of the Quran squeezed from him. Buddha had to go into the wilderness to sit under and wander for years and then sit under the Bodhigaya tree to get his first revelation of nirvana. And Christ had to spend 40 days in the wilderness to discover his divinity for the first time. And his mentor was John the Baptist, who lived in a cave in the Jordan Valley and ate honey of wild bees and locusts. And then all of Christ's parables come from nature. I'm the vine, you are the branches, the mustard seed, the little swallows, the scattering the seeds on the fallow ground. Because that is where we sense the divine. God talks to us through the fishes, the birds, the leaves. They're all, words from our Creator. And that is why we preserve nature.
Yes.
It's not because of it's not because the quantity of carbon. And by the way,
I feel what you said so deeply, I can hardly even express it. And thank you for saying that.
and by the way, the best thing that you can do for climate is to restore the soils. The soils are the solution to everything. The soil will absorb all that carbon. And it'll absorb the water, it'll stop the flooding, it'll give us healthy food. And that's what our national policy has to be. It has to be restoring the soil. And that is, everybody, listen, if you want to unite America and talk about these things, talk about the fishes, the birds, the wildlife, and just talk about ending mountaintop remote mining, talk about ending mountain cutting, talk about getting rid of, the Democrats are putting these offshore wind farms that are exterminating the whales.
I know.
Most of us got into this because of the whales. And they're about to extinguish the right whales, the last ones on Earth, because with these monstrosities that are costing us 3 times the amount. We don't need them. It costs 33 cents a kilowatt hour when you can get onshore wind for 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And who's making the money? Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, foreign governments. And the other thing that they're funding, hundreds of billions of dollars. This is what climate has turned into. Is these climate capture pipelines that are wreaking havoc with the agricultural lands across the Midwest, stealing people's property rights with eminent domain. And who's making the money? BlackRock. And it's a useless technology that does not work. It's just all a boondoggle. And that's what's become the environmental movement in this country. And if you depart from that orthodoxy, you're expelled from it. If you want to make Americans fight each other, talk about carbon. If you want to bring Americans together, talk about habitat protection.
Yeah, nature.
And
It's a little weird for, I mean, you literally spent your life at River Keepers as an environmentalist, environmental lawyer in the environmental movement. I mean, that's your life work product. Or have you been expelled from the movement?
pretty much, yeah. The weird thing is, I think of you as a radical environmentalist.
Well, I definitely am.
Yeah, you are.
I haven't showered inside in 10 years. Yeah, no, I feel it so strongly.
You also, you love nature. You're against these big projects that are destroying it. And you talk about toxics, and the environmental movement no longer talks about toxics anymore. They don't care about it. They don't care that we're mass poisoning our children. It's so weird to me. And I saw you. For 40 years, I've been fighting to get against endocrine disruptors. Endocrine disruptors are a class of chemicals that they alter us hormonally, and they change they can change sexual conduct, they can change sexual development, they can affect fertility, and we've already lost 50% of our sperm count. We're having girls in this country that are achieving puberty on average between 10 and 13 years old. That's 6 years less younger than they were, 80 years ago. We have the lowest puberty levels on any continent in the world here because we're just bombarding our children with endocrine disruptors. And they're chemicals like PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyl, to atrazine, which can turn male frogs into females and produce fertile eggs. That's how potent they are as an endocrine disruptor, and it's in 63% of our water supply. PCBs, which I've been fighting since the day I became an environmental lawyer and getting out of the Hudson. So, and for 40 years, I've been trying to get Republicans to talk about it. I talk with Roger Ailes all the time, who both of us know, who would let me occasionally onto Fox News to talk about it, but there was so much hostility from the Republican Party because it was like you're attacking corporate profit taking, and that these are chemicals, they're molecules, who cares, they can't hurt you. And there was and then you do this incredible show on endocrine disruptors. And I'm like, oh my God, Tucker Carlson has just done the best show that's ever been done, showing, what's happening with endocrine disruptors, and how they're just destroying us. And the Democrats went after you and the environmental movement, and I'm like, what? This is what we've been trying to get for 40 years, the Republicans to care about these issues. And they said, oh, he's saying that chemicals turn people gay, and he's anti-gay, and all this stuff. And that wasn't what you said at all, and that's not what anybody said. And what we're saying is we're destroying our children. That's what we're saying.
Yeah, in God's creation, which is not ours to destroy. Your description of why we protect nature and its role in our lives, and what happens when you're cut off from nature and animals, by being part of nature, is the best I've ever heard, ever. And
Thank you.
I mean it. And when that, when it becomes a matter of quantifying things for profit, then that kind of corrupts the whole enterprise. So my last question, what happens now? You had this kind of amazing announcement with Donald Trump on Friday. It's now Monday, I think, which is 3 days ago. How do you spend from here until election day?
I'm going to work to get him elected. And I'm working with the campaign. We're working on policy issues together. I've been asked to go onto the transition team and, to help pick the people who will be running the government. And I'm looking forward to that. And I'm going to fight. I don't know what would happen to me if we lose.
Well, that's kind of it. I mean, a lot of people I know personally and I'm friends with have gone to prison. One of them's in prison right now, Paul Duro. There are others. What happens if he loses to you?
If
Trump loses and Kamala Harris becomes president?
Oh, I don't know. But I mean, listen, I know, I never really think about that. What I think is, okay, here's what I gotta do today, and get up every day and say, reporting for duty, sir, and then go do that, and nothing's a crisis, everything's a task, right? And so that's what I'm gonna be, kind of a happy warrior, not, I know what I have to do, so I'm gonna do it.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr., thank you.
Thank
That
you.
was really, that was a blessing. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
To watch the rest, unlock our entire vast library of content, you can visit tuckercarlson.com and activate your membership today. In the name of free speech, we hope you will.
Well, I thought it was 2 hours, but I guess it wasn't 2 hours. So I hope that you enjoyed it. There were some things that I kind of worried about. It's hard to tell if they are. Robert Kennedy Jr. was talking about a lot of different religions, and so and I didn't exactly appreciate what he said about Jesus, that he found his deity in the wilderness. That's not true. He knew his deity was always there, and he knew his deity. But but the environmental things seem to be better than I thought. I the same way I like to let things grow. Grow some trees. Let the farmland alone and let it retake itself. And, you see that. Went to visit one of my lots yesterday, and it's grown up, and so that's just the way it will take back and grow back up if we let it alone. And so, but anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this interview, and until next time, we'll see you. Good night.